because it might be able to help us kind of narrow this down a little bit. I mean, my sense of, what the Fusion Center is trying to do, for example, I was watching a special on National Geographic the other night about the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski. To me, there's a gentleman who's building bombs. He's been building his learning, and as it goes on, it gets worse and worse. And he brought together all the different agencies, and a lot of them didn't even want to try anymore. They were that exasperated they couldn't figure it out. I mean, to me, that's where a Fusion Center could really make a difference. My question is, because I can tell you really have a good understanding of this report to me was not written with a lot of background, or just, I mean, to me, it looked like a cut and paste report to a large degree. It wasn't really, in my opinion, greatly researched. And so you have all these broad generalizations, and that's where I think the great frustration came out of a lot of folks, including me, because I go to church, I'm pro-life. I'm not a big fan of illegal immigration. I'm in a lot of those categories. Suddenly, the way this report was written, I mean, I think you can understand where the outcry came from. And so, one of the lines that I've tried to figure out and asked at last committee hearing is, I would like to see at least our law enforcement figure out a way that they can zone in on the Ted Kaczynskis and leave the other law-abiding, freedom-loving Americans who are just voicing their Second Amendment rights out there, their First Amendment rights and Second Amendment, First Amendment, better not say Second Amendment. Just kidding. So that would do. That would do. Yeah, law-abiding way, exactly.
I favor all the amendments, by the way.
Exactly. But anyway, that was state law. But you understand where I'm going with this?
I think so, and I hope that maybe I just went too fast, because I'm always been accused of talking too fast. I apologize if I went this too fast. But one of the key things that fusion centers do is to weed out the odd request, or I'm not referencing whatever municipal police department or sheriff's office sees something and says, gee, that looks, I've read something in the paper, I saw a TV show, for example, and terrorists do that, I think, and I saw this in my local neighborhood, I'm going to kick that up the chain, and it gets to the MIAC, and the MIAC, because they have developed expertise, can say, no, that's not it. We know this is not an indicator, there's no indication of that kind of activity in your area. Anything's possible. We don't think so. Don't waste your time on it. And so it saves resources, in truth, to have an effective functioning MIAC to weed out, like I said, the misdirected inquiries, the false tips, and the false leads. So that's a key thing. It saves resources to have a MIAC. So supporting the MIAC, just like buying insurance, it's a smart thing to do in the long run. And kind of go to your point too, one of the things that I think a lot of people who read this report, or maybe didn't read it closely, or maybe they didn't read it all and they read it about it in the paper and were concerned and sent out emails, like people would send out emails. I believe these are good-hearted people, and they're as good citizens as you want to have, by and large. But it's kind of the same thing as when the Patriot Act was enacted. One of my jobs I got as the ATAC coordinator was to go around, and I can't tell you how many public meetings and church groups and everything else I went to describe, here's what the Patriot Act is, and if you read it, which it's like a phone book, and I would bet right now I'm the only person in this room who's read the whole thing. If you read it and understood how it was devised and what the protections were there, et cetera, it was not alarming. There were a couple things like, that's a little bit of a reach, but they've been tweaked over the years, and again, it was a reaction to a major attack on our nation, and so it was crafted very quickly. But the Patriot Act, in terms of being a scary thing with Big Brother every time they do things, it didn't happen. There have been very few changes in it, almost nothing in it was ever found unconstitutional, and those minor provisions that have been amended by Congress. The Patriot Act effectively is in the same shape now it was, and I would wager that most people in this room and most people in our nation, plus our state, have made no changes. The most sensible people have made no changes in how they live or what they've done or what they do in their free time or if they look at pornography. People live the way they live, and the Patriot Act didn't change anyway. Words of people who read some articles and were misled by it, just like this MIAC thing, words of people they read about it, but if they read it and if they put it in context of how law enforcement works, they wouldn't be as worried. That's not to say it could have been worded better, it could have had some provisos, it could have been reviewed by a privacy panel. My suggestion would possibly have an attorney. Some naturally recommend an attorney gets involved at some level, but it does make sense to have some kind of privacy attorney or another attorney involved at some level. And that's in part, though, because, and I'd recommend an article to you if you have time to look up. There's a publication, it's a law journal, but it's not your standard law journal, called the Green Bag. Any lawyers may have read about the Green Bag. 10 Green Bag Second is the citation of the article. Jim Comey, who was the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, it's at page 439, wrote an article called Intelligence Under the Law. It's really good. It's brief, and it's to the point, and it's not exactly the point I think what your committee's looking at, but it describes, in the first half at least, why lawyers get trained to be analytically, if they pay attention to law school, and kind of do exactly what intelligence analysts are supposed to do. And there's no magic. We ascribe some magic label to this is intelligence. It must be something that is extraordinarily difficult. If they're smarter than me, they work for an intelligence agency. That's not so. They are analytical, hopefully, and they're bright and concerned and look at details. There's something called atypical analysis, and hopefully they do that. They bounce ideas off one another, and they consider all the possibilities. They choose their words, hopefully smartly, with care, and whatever review gets in place, and the product then is useful. The product that generated this series of hearings maybe wasn't as useful as people would like, but again, putting it in context and had it been reviewed maybe one or two more times, or some wording change, or just a simple proviso added here and there, saying these are suggestions, this doesn't mean you're supposed to pick on any particular person, things like that, the flat could have been handled differently. Again, my concern was that the response was out of proportion. Both the public response and the governmental response was out of proportion to the harm, if there was harm, and that the response actually has set us back in this state. We were a leader, and that's, again, not to, Dave Hall is a terrific guy, he's doing a great job, and I heard nothing, I mean that, because I still stay involved in the community of law enforcement. He's done a great job, but he's learning. Van Gotze was down the road a little bit, and in terms of his abilities, and he was completely well-connected on a national level, and the MIAC was one of the leaders on a low budget of fusion centers in our country. So whatever the committee may recommend in terms of legislation oversight, I just hope we don't go backwards. That's why I kind of wanted to go into that kind of brief intelligence analysis of the world situation, looking down the road for 10, 15 years, whatever, because, like I said, if you think that, oh, we can wait on these kind of things, the federal government's going to take care of it for us, the CIA, the CIA is a wonderful agency too, but there's a whole book written by a guy named Tim Weiner. If you read that, you'll think, holy cow, how have we ever had the CIA get by this long? The country's not just dismantling it because there's so many mistakes that they've made over the years. Of course, the good things they've done don't get publicized now. Good things in my act have done probably don't get publicized now either. So again, I've kind of rambled on here. I apologize for that. Any other questions?
I'm going to recognize the gentleman from St. Louis City. I believe you have a question, gentleman.
Yeah, a question and comment. First, my comment is,